If you would, as you're taking your seat, grab your copy of God's Word, open up to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. It's family worship. The kids are in here, okay? And I'm making sure that mine gets where he's supposed to be. Nailed it. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. We're going to finish the book today that we've been walking through over the last couple of months. And as I was reading our passage for this week, I was thinking about just how oftentimes we find ourselves in places where maybe there's kind of a motivational kind of rah-rah speech, and then it just ends, and you're left with, well, now what, right? Maybe you've been in a meeting and there's some evaluations that are happening and your boss is like talking about all the things that, hey, we just need to do this better, we need to do this better, and then they just walk out. Like, whoa, okay, what do I do now? Like maybe you've been a part of a team and first half didn't go so great. Now you're in the locker room, you get this huge motivational chewing about what happened in the first half, and then the coach just walks out. You're like, okay, well, I think we're supposed to do something different this half, but I don't know what it is we're supposed to do. It just gets left short, right? And it gets left short because there's no application of here's what we're going to do now because this hasn't been working, right? And so it is with the book of Ecclesiastes. We've seen over these first 11 chapters this kind of general theme that all is vanity. It's all meaningless, and the writer can leave it short if we stop there and don't read chapter 12. But thankfully, we have chapter 12, so it's not left short. So if you would, look with me at verse 1, Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed. And the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with a great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Verse 13, the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. He said the same thing throughout the entirety of the book. All is vanity. It's all meaningless. It's like striving after the wind. It's like chasing something that you can't get a hold of. It's all meaningless. And throughout this book, there's something that he's reminded us of. He even starts here in verse 1. He says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. The writer says to remember. Well, remember what? Like he said all of these things over the last 11 chapters, that everything is vanity, it's all meaningless, just get rid of all of it. But in the midst of that, he said this one thing that kind of keeps recurring, and he's walking through that in this text. He says, remember that the inescapable is coming, that death is inevitable. The end is approaching. And because it is, he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Look at how he says it in verse 2. It says, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. As I was reading this text, I was realizing that I'm experiencing more of this than I want to admit to, right? You know what he's talking about in verse 2? He's talking about as the inevitable is approaching, you will start to lose your eyesight. You won't be able to see things as well as you used to. I've been wearing glasses for a long time, but I realize every day that my eyes are just getting worse and worse and worse because the end is approaching. And he says, as it does, you'll start to lose your sight. You won't be able to see the light and the moon and the stars in the way that they once were because they're becoming darkened. And then look what he says in verse 3. He says, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut. When the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. Kids, have your parents ever told you to stand up straight? To sit up straight? Have they told you that before? Can I give you a word of advice? Listen to them now. Because as you get older, what does the text say? It says the strong men are now bent. They're wearing down, right? Parents, you're like, man, if I had just listened and worked on my posture when I was younger, right? Because it's harder now to develop it. Because you're just used to kind of slouching over. He says your posture begins to go, but then he also says that the grinding starts to be lower because there's less. You know what he's talking about? He's talking about your teeth. The older you get, the less teeth you have. Kids, do you like candy? Yeah. Did you guys eat too much candy at Halloween? Yeah, okay, some. Anybody still hiding candy? No? Okay. Parents, I was trying to help you out. Like maybe you get a confession, like somebody's hiding candy, right? Parents, are any of you still hiding candy? Yeah. What happens, kids, what happens when you eat too much candy? You get a sugar rush, and if you don't take care of your teeth start to decay. And eventually they fall out. I experienced this when I was a child. Because I would watch my granddad, who was a large man. My granddad was 6'4". That's where my height comes from. So I'm thankful for that. But I would watch my granddad eat and just realize, like, he's just eating way faster and more than anyone else is. I thought, what is going on? And then I realized he wasn't necessarily eating faster than everyone else. He was just more focused because he wasn't talking. He was just eating. And then as I got older, I came to this discovery. I watched my granddad eat all of this food, all of these years, right? You know what I discovered? You know how many teeth he had? 4. It's like, how in the world did you eat all of those teeth, all of the food, right? Like he had 4 teeth. There's no way he could have eaten that corn on the cob, but he did. He figured it out somehow, right? Those 4 remaining teeth were just working harder than anything else. But do you know why he only had 4 teeth? Because he didn't take care of them when he was younger, and as old age approached, they started to fall out. The writer says that as old age approaches, your posture begins to bend, your grinders begin to loosen and fall out. He mentions your eyesight again going. He mentions the hearing going. He mentions the loss of sleep, that you're awakened by just the sound of a bird. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents as I was growing up, and my granddad, who's 6'4", when I was in junior high, asked me if I would help him bale hay. Now, I know there's few and far between of those that are left that still do square bales, but there's still some, right? And when I was in junior high, my granddad, who was already in his 70s at this point, asked me to help him pick up the hay bales in the field. Now, I have no idea how big this field was, right? To a junior higher, it was like endless. And what I discovered in the midst of that was every time I picked up one bale of hay to put on the trailer, my granddad had already done 3. What? How is this happening, right? Then as I got older, my granddad had for 30 plus years been the custodian of the school in his small town. It was a K through 12 school, so all of these kids had grown up knowing my granddad and seeing him in the hallways, right? And I found out that the boys, their goal in life was by the time they graduated from North City High School was to be able to shake my granddad's hand and squeeze it and watch him wince instead of them. One day I finally accomplished that because as the end was approaching, his strength was leaving him, his posture was changing, his teeth were falling out, his eyesight was going. The inevitable is approaching. The writer says that eventually the gray hair will come, right? I like getting haircuts because I cut out all the gray hair. It was a joke, guys. I can't actually cut it out. It's just less seen. He says you'll have difficulty walking, right? All of these things are happening as old age is coming on and the end is approaching. But what is he really saying? Because if you go back to verse 1, he says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. The end is coming. And because it is, remember in the days of your youth to build the right habits. When you think about it, the habits that you developed as a young child, those are the habits that have continued into adulthood, right? Those of us who are older, who are past our adolescent years, past our teen years into adulthood, you realize how much more difficult it is to build new habits, right? Because the things that happen at a young age just get married into who we are because we're developing. And those habits carry on. He says, listen, the inevitable is approaching. And so you need to remember in the days of your youth to build the right habits. Now, none of us can go back to our youth and change the things that we were developing, right? But if you are parents, you can develop the right habits in your children, and you can change the habits that are in your life for the future. The habits that are built in our youth tend to last, but the habits that we try to build in our older days are much harder to build. Like you think about it from a physical standpoint. Like your work ethic was developed when you were young, from either participating or watching someone else's work ethic, right? Think about the physical work ethic, the physical habits that you built at a young age, and now you're living out as an adult, right? Now, listen, we all know that we're living in a generation where people are just screaming, like, get off screens, get off screens, get off screens, right? Like, quit playing so much video games, like, quit being lazy, get off the couch, all these things, right? But how many of us as adults are just saying, quit doing that, but we're not actually teaching them what they should do? Because if you go back to your youth, it may not have been screens and video games and whatever, but I'm sure that there was something that you were doing as a child that your parents or someone in leadership over you said, hey, that's not the right thing. You should do this instead, right? And hopefully they taught you the right thing to do. But we need to understand that in the days of our youth, that's when those things are being developed. So we need to look at this as a discipleship thing. Like, how are we discipling the younger generation to build the right habits and remember the Creator in their youth? Think about it from a social perspective. Like, your social habits were probably built at a younger age, right? There were some social habits of extrovertedness or introvertedness that were developed in you at a young age based on who you were spending time with and what environments you were put into, right? Now, there's some personality things with that. You're like, yeah, actually, I was put in a lot of extrovert environments, and I discovered that I don't like those. So now I'm an introvert, right? But those things are being built at a young age in the life of your child. Think about it from an intellectual standpoint. What's the habit of learning that's evident in your life? Like, I can remember as a child, like I can still see it today, the amount of books that my dad has. And learning that of all of these books that he has, many of them he's read multiple times. But I can't ever remember as a child my dad reading a book to me. I saw the books, but the habit wasn't built in growing and learning from an intellectual standpoint of reading. And so when I got to middle school and high school and it was required to read certain things, I struggled with that. What's the habit that you're building from an intellectual standpoint? And then you think about spiritual. What's the spiritual habit of teaching, right? That you're developing in your children to get them in the right places where they're hearing the right teaching and just teaching them how to be in the presence of God. You can easily distinguish between, as a child, I experienced that or I didn't experience that, right? You can change that habit as an adult. It becomes much more difficult, but what we have to understand in this reflective question that we need to ask is, what are the habits in our lives that are unhelpful or even wasteful? We've titled this whole series through the book of Ecclesiastes, Don't Waste Your Life. The writer says again here at the end of the book that the inevitable is coming. The end is approaching. And what will you do if you get to the end and look back and say, oh, I've wasted it? So ask the question now. What are the habits in your life that are unhealthy, that are unhelpful, that are wasteful, that you need to change? And don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying do better. I'm saying when the Holy Spirit convicts you of the habits that are in your life that are unhelpful and wasteful, lean into the Spirit and respond in the right way to get rid of those bad habits and build the right habits. One of the things that that's happened over the course of church history is what's become known as catechism, okay? If you have ever experienced a Roman Catholic or even a Lutheran context, you're probably familiar with catechism, right? But the reality is this, is that it wasn't developed in the last few hundred years. It was developed years ago in the people of God. If you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is known as the Shema, it's what the Jews begin every day with, that the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And we need to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And then you know how it continues? It says, write those things on your doorposts. Put them as frontlets. Put them on your forehead. Talk about them in your home. Talk about them as you're walking on the road. Talk about them as you're at work. Talk about them with your kids. Build these things into your kids. If you've ever experienced a Catholic or Lutheran context, you understand catechism. If you've ever experienced an evangelical context, let me just tell you that we've done a terrible job of catechizing our people. Catechism is a tool of discipleship that is based on question and answer. There's a question and there's an answer. And over the course of repeating those things back and forth, those truths begin to sink deep. So I want to read to us from the Westminster Shorter Catechism in a statement that comes out of this text, out of Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. The question is this: what is the chief end of man? And the response is, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. So the question is, what is the chief end of man? And the answer is, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. If we stop at verse 8 of chapter 12, we leave it short. But the writer of Ecclesiastes gives the answer to the question. If the question is, everything is meaningless, what do you do? The answer is in verse 13. The end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Fear God and keep His commandments. It's that simple. That when we talk about fearing God, we're not talking about this scared fear, like, I'm not sure if I can approach Him. I don't know what's going to happen to me if I do approach Him. I'm not sure what's going to happen if I don't do what He's told me to do. No, the fear that the Scriptures is talking about is this reverent fear. This reverence, this awe that we have in the presence of God. Not because of what He's done, but because of who He is. And because of who He is, we fear Him out of this awe-inspiring respect that we have for God. And because we reverently fear Him because of who He is and because of what He has done, we're able to approach Him without being afraid. The text says to fear God, which is to literally worship Him. To glorify God in all that we do. Let me put it in a little bit easier language for us with this take-home truth. That living for Christ boils down to this: fear God and keep His commands. Living for Christ boils down to this: fear God and keep His commands. Now, I think that's a statement that we experience in different ways, because I think if you are following Jesus, you have a desire to live for Christ, right? You desire to live for Christ. You feel this responsibility to live for Him. And so we need to understand that living for Christ boils down to this: fear God and keep His commands. Pretty simple, right? Maybe we need an illustration to just kind of lay it out. I've got a couple volunteers. Boys, you ready? Okay. Sawyer and Everett are going to help me. They have no idea what they're going to do. Do you guys work out? You guys lift weights sometimes? One of you come over here to this side. Grab that side. Okay, if you don't know these boys, yeah, turn this way. Yeah, there you go. Okay, just hold it like right here where your elbow's bent, okay? These are two of my baseball boys. This off season, right? You're supposed to be working out, aren't you? Yeah. Yeah. We've got to get ready, right? Here's what I think happens in life, okay? We say we want to live for Christ. Is that heavy? It's a little heavy. Yeah, it's a little heavy. It's all right. You don't have to tell them that. We want to live for Christ, right? And what we fail to remember is that God has already set the standard. Okay? God has set the standard. And what we try to do, okay, raise it up a little bit. Okay? Now lower it down. Go down further. Yeah. Okay, now just go however you want. Same level, stay the same, doesn't matter. We take God's standard and we try to move it, right? We're trying to move it. Okay, come back. Right? God has set a standard. And living for Christ boils down to this: fear God and keep His commands. That's it. We don't have any responsibility or any freedom to raise or lower the bar. God has set the bar. But here's what we often do with the way that we live. We say, I need to show up more. I need to serve more. I need to give more, right? And we just keep adding to it. All right, bring it up. Hold it right there. You know what Jesus says in Matthew 11? He says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest, because my burden is light. Is it easier to hold now? Now let go. Just let go. Let go. God says, I've set the standard. You don't have to hold the standard. You don't get to add to it. All right, grab it because it's heavy. Living for Christ boils down to this: fear God and keep his commands. We don't need to add to it. Okay? Thanks, boys. Good job. I got it. Trust me, I got it. We spend way too much time trying to add to the expectations that God has on us. We try to interpret his expectations when he's made it so simple. He says, look, fear God and keep his commands. That's it. What's up, bro? You coming to hang out with me? Let me tie these two things together, okay? Because he says, fear God and keep his commands, all right? If fearing God is this glorifying of him in our worship, then keeping his commands is our response of obedience. But here's what's interesting. If you go back to the Westminster Shorter Catechism, the response is that man's chief end is to glorify God through our worship and to enjoy him forever. And all of us are like, man, I've never obeyed a command that was enjoyable. Because we didn't want to obey it, right? We didn't want to be told what to do. And so we take that and we look at God and say, God, you're just telling me all these things that I have to do. But listen, Jesus isn't telling you anything you have to do that he hasn't already done. And he's done it to perfection. Even if we could obey every command to perfection, the way that God has desired it, we couldn't have been the sacrifice that Jesus was. God has set the standard. We need to quit adding to it. The response is to fear God and keep his commands. Now listen, that doesn't mean that the tools are bad, okay? It's right for us to gather together, okay? It's right for us to study God's word. It's right for us to serve in the life of the church. It's right for us to give to the mission of the church. It is wrong for us to put those things as the main thing and try to obey the commands that God has laid out for those who are following Jesus when we've never followed Jesus. If you are only trying to obey God's commands without first following Jesus, all of those commands are going to feel like extra weight on that standard that he's given. And eventually you're going to get to a point where the weight is so heavy that you can't bear, that you just quit and say, you know what, I don't feel like going to church today. Yeah, you know what, I know they said they needed that, but I just don't really want to. Listen, the commands that God has given are for those that are following him. And the first command that he gave to the disciples was what? Follow me. Follow me. Listen, when we have trusted in Christ, when we're following Jesus, now we can obey those commands with joy. And we can truly enjoy him forever. So what's our response? It's to fear God through worshiping. Just worship God. Be in awe of who he is. Give him praise with your voice. And then keep his commands with joyful obedience. With joyful obedience.